The vice principal leaned back in his chair like a man who had never once been told no. "Your son cheated," he said flatly. "We have a witness. Case closed. The suspension stands, and the scholarship committee has already been notified." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "Sign here, acknowledging the disciplinary action." I looked at him. I looked at the paper. And I thought about the 14 years I spent doing something most people have never heard of: forensic data recovery for corporate fraud investigations. I didn't sign anything. I just stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked out. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 32 years old. I work out of a home office now, independent consulting, mostly boring contracts for insurance companies and small law firms. Before that, I spent over a decade pulling deleted files, reconstructing timelines, and testifying in federal courtrooms about digital evidence that put executives in prison. I left that world because I wanted something quieter. I wanted to coach my son's youth baseball on weekends. I wanted to be home for dinner. I thought I was done with all of it. I was wrong. 3 days before that meeting with the vice principal, my son Tyler came home from school and went straight to his room without saying a word. Tyler was 15 and had never once in his life walked past me without at least a nod. I followed him down the hall and knocked. Nothing. I opened the door and found him sitting on the edge of his bed, still in his backpack, staring at the floor. "What happened?" I asked. He looked up. His eyes were red but dry, like someone who had been crying for a while and had simply run out. "They said I cheated on the AP chemistry exam," he said. "They said I let Derek copy off me, and then I copied off him too. They said we planned it together." I sat down beside him. "Did you?" He looked at me straight. "No, Dad. I believed him. Not blindly the way some parents do. I believed him because I have spent years learning how to read a story from evidence, and I knew my son. I knew the way he studied, the color-coded notebooks, the flashcard stacks on the kitchen table every Sunday night for 2 months leading up to that exam. I also knew something else. I knew who Derek was. Derek Calloway was a junior, the starting quarterback, and his uncle was Vice Principal Roland Sims. Derek had a full athletic scholarship offer already locked in, conditional on keeping his GPA above a 3. AP Chemistry was the one class threatening that number. Tyler had scored a 94. Derek had scored a 91. And somehow that had become evidence of a conspiracy. I didn't say any of that to Tyler that night. I just told him to get some rest and that I would handle it. I drove to the school the next morning alone. That's when I sat across from Roland Sims and he told me it was over. That's when he slid that paper across the desk and expected me to fold. I drove home, made coffee, and opened my laptop. The first thing I did was email the school district's official records department requesting Tyler's complete academic file under FERPA. I CC'd a former colleague who now worked in educational law. I kept the email polite, precise, and time-stamped. Then I called Tyler's AP chemistry teacher, a woman named Mrs. Alderman who had actually taught both boys in the same class. She picked up on the second ring. "Marcus," she said, and her voice was careful in a way that told me she already knew why I was calling. "I just need to understand the process." I said. "Who flagged this?" Silence. "Mrs. Alderman." "It didn't come from me," she said quietly. "I graded those tests myself. The scores were different enough that I didn't see a pattern. The flag came from the Academic Integrity Committee. Roland runs that committee." I thanked her and hung up. Within 48 hours, I had requested the full chain of custody for both exams under the district's disciplinary transparency policy, a policy most parents don't know exists because nobody reads the 40-page handbook they send home in August. I also requested the seating chart from the day of the exam. When it arrived, I looked at it for a long time. Tyler sat in row 3, seat 2. Derek sat in row 5, seat 4. 7 feet apart, with another student directly between them. You cannot visually copy an exam from 7 feet away during a timed, supervised test. It is not physically possible. I documented that. I created a clean digital file, time-stamped, sourced, annotated. Then I started pulling threads. One thing I learned doing fraud work is that nobody does something like this once. Roland Sims had been vice principal at that school for 11 years. 11 years is a long time to protect one kid. So I started looking backward. I still had access to some tools I'd used professionally. Legal tools, publicly available databases, archived board minutes, FOIA requests, school district transparency portals. I spent 3 evenings going through them the way I used to go through financial records methodically, without assumptions, just looking for patterns. What I found took my breath away. In the past 6 years, 4 students had been disciplined for academic dishonesty during exam periods where Derek Calloway was also taking the same exam. 3 of those students were in accelerated classes where Derek had been enrolled but struggling. All 4 had their disciplinary records submitted through the same internal committee, Roland Sims committee. 2 of those students had eventually transferred to different schools. 1 had dropped the AP track entirely. The 4th had graduated but missed the honor roll by the margin of the grade reduction from the infraction. Tyler would have been the 5th. I sat in my home office at 11:43 on a Tuesday night, looking at what I had built. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was something quieter and more devastating, a pattern. A system. A habit of protection that had been running for years, hidden in plain sight behind the language of academic integrity. I called my son into the kitchen. He sat down across from me and I showed him the seating chart. I showed him the timeline. I didn't show him everything, but I showed him enough. He looked at me and said the thing that broke me open just a little, "Dad, why does nobody care?" I put my hand flat on the table between us. "They're about to," I said. I did not go to the media. Not yet. I did not post anything publicly. I did not call a lawyer, though I had one on standby. Instead, I did what I always did before a big case presentation. I made sure every single piece of evidence was clean, sourced, and undeniable. Then I waited for the right moment to place it in the right hands. The school board held its monthly public meeting on the 2nd Thursday of every month. I submitted a speaker request 6 days in advance, standard procedure, listed as a parent with a concern regarding disciplinary process. Routine. Unremarkable. Exactly how I wanted it. Meanwhile, I kept looking. A former student from 3 years ago had posted something on a local community forum about feeling wrongly accused at the school. The post was old and buried, but I found it. I reached out through a private message, introduced myself, explained what I was doing, and asked if she would be willing to speak with me. She responded within an hour. Her name was Priya. She had been flagged for academic dishonesty during a midterm in a class she shared with Derek Calloway during his sophomore year. She had documentation she had kept because her mother had insisted on it. She never went public because the family had been new to the district and didn't want the trouble. She sent me everything in a single PDF, apologized for how disorganized it was. It wasn't disorganized at all. It was exactly what I needed. I added it to the file. 2 nights before the board meeting, something happened that I had not planned for but had suspected might come. Tyler's phone buzzed at dinner. He looked at it and his face changed. He turned the screen toward me without a word. It was a message from an account with a username I didn't recognize. No profile picture. The message read, "Your dad should stop making noise. Derek's future matters more than your feelings. Sit down or things get worse for your family." I took a photo of the screen, the timestamp, the username, everything. Then I handed the phone back to Tyler and told him to eat. "Are you scared?" he asked. "No," I said. And I meant it. Because that message had just become Exhibit 17. I traced the account through a digital path that I won't describe in detail because most of it isn't interesting, but the short version is that the device used to send it was registered to a network address 2 blocks from the school. That was enough. I packaged it into the file with a note, "Witness intimidation. Minor recipient. Unsolicited contact." On Thursday evening I drove to the district offices alone. I wore a plain dark suit. I carried a single folder. I had submitted my 3 minutes in advance and I intended to use every second of them. The boardroom was about half full. Parents, a couple of local reporters who covered the school district beat, staff members. I recognized the athletic director in the 3rd row. I recognized Roland Sims sitting near the back, arms crossed, looking like a man who had watched 100 parents come through that door and leave without accomplishing anything. When my name was called, I walked to the podium. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse anyone by name in the first 60 seconds. I simply explained that my son had been suspended for academic dishonesty based on a complaint that was structurally impossible given the physical layout of the testing environment, and that I had documentation to support that claim. I referenced the seating chart. I referenced Mrs. Alderman's original assessment. I referenced the FERPA file I had requested, and the timeline discrepancy I had found in how the complaint was initiated. Then I paused. "I also want the board to be aware," I said, "that this appears to not be an isolated incident." I described the pattern. Not Priya by name, not yet. Not the other students by name. Just the pattern. 6 years. 5 students. 1 committee, 1 beneficiary. Then I slid the folder across the table to the board chair. This contains full documentation. It has also been submitted to the district's ombudsman office, the State Department of Education Student Rights Division, and a journalist with the regional education desk who has been covering district administration for 9 years. I looked up. Roland Sims had gone very still. "I'm not asking you to take my word for anything," I said. "The records speak for themselves. I'm asking you to read them." I stepped back from the podium. Someone in the second row had their phone up. I noticed it but said nothing. The meeting ended 20 minutes later with a lot of quiet side conversations and a statement from the board chair that the matter would be reviewed. Standard language. But the two board members closest to the chair were leaning toward her, speaking in low, urgent tones, and the athletic director had already left the room. The clip was online before I got home. By the next morning, it had been shared in 4 different local parent Facebook groups. By noon, a regional news outlet had reached out to the journalist I had mentioned, who confirmed she had the documentation and was preparing a story. By evening, the school district's main social media pages were flooded with comments from alumni, current parents, and people who simply saw a clip of a father standing at a podium with a folder and a flat, steady voice, and understood immediately what they were looking at. I hadn't said Tyler's name publicly. I had made sure of that. But everyone who knew anything about that school knew exactly who the story was about. The district went quiet. Institutionally quiet, the kind of quiet that means lawyers are talking to each other in conference rooms. I knew that quiet. I had caused it before, in corporate settings, and it always meant the same thing. They were trying to figure out how much I actually had before deciding whether to fight or settle. I had everything. And I let them keep wondering for another 72 hours. On Monday morning, Priya's family released a short statement through a community advocacy organization agreeing to be identified in the journalist's story. By Monday afternoon, 2 more former students had reached out to me directly after seeing the clip. Their stories fit the same pattern so precisely it was almost mechanical. The journalist published on Wednesday. The headline was careful and factual. Records raise questions about repeated disciplinary pattern at regional high school benefiting athletes' academic standing. It was not a screaming headline. It didn't need to be. The story underneath it was thorough, sourced, and accompanied by 4 sidebar testimonials from students and families across a 6-year span. By Thursday, Derek Calloway had been quietly withdrawn from 2 of his AP classes. By Friday, Roland Sims had taken a sudden personal leave of absence. The school board released a statement announcing a full independent audit of the Academic Integrity Committee's procedures going back 7 years. Tyler's suspension was formally rescinded on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after I had walked out of Roland Sims' office without signing that paper. The letter from the district was carefully worded to say the matter had been reviewed and resolved in the student's favor following additional examination of the evidence. No apology. Just the reversal. Tyler read the letter at the kitchen table. He folded it and set it down. "What happens to Derek?" he asked. "That's not up to me anymore," I said. "I gave the information to people whose job it is to figure that out." He nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment, then, "Did you know it would work?" I thought about that honestly. "I knew the evidence was real," I said. Real evidence, put in front of the right people, in the right way, is hard to ignore indefinitely. That's the only thing I was sure of. He picked up the letter again and read it one more time. Then, he looked at me with something in his face that wasn't exactly happiness. It was more like the specific relief of being believed by the world after the world told you it wouldn't. The independent audit ran for 6 weeks. What it found went further than I had expected, though maybe it shouldn't have surprised me. The Academic Integrity Committee had been used to suppress not just exam results but a disciplinary complaint filed 2 years earlier by a student who had been physically intimidated in a locker room by 2 members of the football team. The complaint had been received, logged, and then quietly filed under resolved without any formal investigation. The student had never been told it was closed. He had just stopped hearing anything back and eventually assumed nothing would happen. That finding went to the county's Student Protection Board, which triggered its own review, which pulled 3 administrators into depositions. Collapse doesn't come all at once. It comes the way a wall comes down when you've been working at the foundation quietly, incrementally, and then suddenly all at once. The athletic director resigned. 2 staff members were terminated for failure to report. Roland Sims did not return from his personal leave. The district entered into a binding agreement with the state education department that included mandatory third-party oversight of disciplinary procedures for 5 years and required written notification to every student who had received an academic integrity flag through the committee going back a decade, giving each family the right to request a formal review. I did not go to the press conference the district held to announce the agreement. I watched it on a live stream on my laptop. A board member read a prepared statement about the district's commitment to equitable treatment of all students. The language was institutional and hollow in the way that language always is when institutions are trying to sound accountable without actually saying they were wrong. But the agreement was real. The oversight was real. And the 7 families who had contacted me over those weeks, 7, not 4, because 3 more had come forward after the audit announcement, each received formal letters acknowledging that their children's records would be reviewed. Tyler started back at school on a Thursday. I drove him. He didn't ask me to, but I wanted to. When I pulled up to the entrance, he got out of the car and slung his backpack over one shoulder and turned back to look at me through the open door. "You know what the worst part was?" he said. "What?" For about 2 days, I actually wondered if somehow I had done something wrong without knowing it. Like maybe I looked at his test by accident or something. He shook his head slowly. I started doubting my own memory. That stayed with me for the rest of the drive home. The thing these systems do that never makes it into any formal record is the quiet damage they do to the people they target, the way they reach inside someone and make them uncertain of their own truth. Tyler had done nothing wrong. He knew that. And still, for 2 days, the machinery of official authority had been powerful enough to make him question himself. That's what I had actually been fighting. Not Roland Sims, not Derek Calloway, not even the committee. I had been fighting the idea that power gets to decide what's true. It doesn't. Not when you have documentation. A few weeks later, I got a message through my professional contact page. It was from a mother in a different district, 2 counties over. Her daughter had been flagged for plagiarism on a history paper. The teacher who flagged it had been dating the father of the student whose paper her daughter had allegedly copied. She had no idea where to start. She found my name through the community forum post that Priya's family had shared. I read her message twice. Then I closed my laptop, went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood at the window for a while. Tyler was in the backyard throwing a baseball against the pitching net we'd set up along the fence. He had his headphones on. He was focused, relaxed, just practicing the same motion over and over the way he always did when something was bothering him and he needed to work it out without talking about it. I watched him for a minute. Then I went back to the desk and started typing a reply. Because the thing about a system that does this is that it doesn't stop on its own. It stops when enough people understand the specific language it actually responds to, which is not anger, not noise, not threats. It's documentation. It's patience. It's knowing exactly what to put in front of exactly the right set of eyes. I had spent 14 years learning that language for corporations. I figured it was time to put it to better use. I didn't destroy Roland Sims. I didn't ruin Derek Calloway's life. I simply made sure the truth was too well documented and too widely distributed to be quietly closed in a drawer again. And somewhere in a district 2 counties over, a mother with a flagged plagiarism notice and a daughter who had done nothing wrong was waiting to hear that someone understood exactly how to help her. I hit send.